If I were to take a highly detailed snapshot of your brain right this very second, and then compare it to a snapshot taken from, say, 5 years ago, I wouldn't just be looking at a brain that's, holding different thoughts.
Right, it's completely different.
Exactly. I would be looking at completely different physical architecture. Like the literal biological matter has rearranged itself. So from a strictly biological standpoint, the person you were 5 years ago is essentially dead, which, raises a rather terrifying but completely unavoidable question for you as you listen to this deep dive. Who is actually listening right now?
It's a lot to take in. It immediately shatters the comfort we all carry around, right? That feeling that we are this solid, unchanging object. Because we assume identity is like a mountain. You look in the mirror, you see your face, you remember your childhood, and you just assume the core of who you are is a permanent fixture.
Oh, yeah. We absolutely rely on that expectation of permanence just to get out of bed in the morning. I mean, we make plans for tomorrow, assuming the person who wakes up will be the exact same entity who went to sleep.
Yeah. Right, you have to.
Yeah. But the source material we are jumping into today, it just takes a sledgehammer to that assumption. We are tackling the oldest question in human history: who am I? And the mission for this deep dive is to fundamentally challenge how you view your own identity. Our sources argue that we aren't a fixed object at all. Instead, identity is actually a continuously updated narrative. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to get into the right headspace here, we should really start with this thought experiment our sources use to ground this abstract concept.
Yeah.
So I want you to actively imagine losing every single memory of your past, like a total wipe.
It's gone.
Completely gone. Every childhood friend, every mistake you've made, every triumph, every single context clue about your life is erased. Would you still be you? Or, take it even further into the realm of your environment. Imagine that instead of where you actually grew up, you were raised in a completely different country. You spoke a different language from birth. You were raised in a totally different religion. You absorbed entirely different cultural traditions. If every single input changes, does a core you remain untouched?
My immediate instinct is to stubbornly insist, well, of course I'd still be me. Just, wearing a different cultural outfit or something.
Yes, that's what we all want to believe.
But the more I sit with it, the more that argument just completely falls apart. Because if everything I believe and how I communicate and every memory I draw upon to make decisions is entirely swapped out, there doesn't seem to be anything left of the original version. And it stops being this fun, casual, philosophical riddle when you look at the actual brain scans. Biology backs this up in a way that is just hard to ignore.
It really does. That biological reality is driven by a mechanism called neuroplasticity. And for a really long time, the prevailing wisdom was that the adult brain was basically a finished product.
Like it was done growing.
Exactly. We thought it was like clay that had been fired in a kiln. Once you hit a certain age, your neural pathways were locked in, and then you just slowly lost brain cells as you aged. That was the consensus. But modern neuroscience paints a picture of a brain that is in a state of violent, constant physical remodeling.
And we aren't just talking about abstract learning here. We are talking about literal physical matter changing shape inside your skull right now as you process the very words we are speaking.
Yeah, let's actually look at the mechanism of how that happens, because it's vital to understanding why identity isn't fixed. Every single conversation you have, every new concept you grasp, every heartbreak you endure, it doesn't just pass through your mind like wine through a tree.
Right.
It triggers an electrical impulse, an action potential that races down a neuron. And when that signal hits a synapse, it releases chemical neurotransmitters to cross the gap to the next neuron. If that specific pathway is used enough, the brain physically responds. It triggers protein synthesis. You are literally building new synaptic receptors.
It's like your brain is a house where the construction crew never, ever leaves.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, they're just constantly knocking down walls and adding new rooms based on whatever happened to you that day. So if you decide to, learn the guitar, the crew starts pouring a new foundation in the motor cortex. If you go through a terrible breakup, they might start tearing out the wiring in your emotional regulation centers.
And that construction crew analogy holds up even better when you look at how the brain actually speeds up those connections. When you repeat a behavior, your brain wraps those specific neural pathways in this fatty substance called myelin.
Oh, right, myelination.
Exactly. It acts like insulation on a copper wire, which makes the electrical signal travel faster and way more efficiently. So the brain you possess today is fundamentally physically insulated and wired differently than the one you had a decade ago.
Which is wild to think about, because if the physical structure of the house is completely radically different from a decade ago, I can't in good faith call it the same house.
Right, biologically speaking, it's not.
Which leads to the massive contradiction at the heart of this. If my physical brain is constantly changing and this internal construction crew is endlessly rearranging the walls, why do I wake up feeling like the exact same person every single day? I mean, I never wake up and think, whoa, the living room is missing. I just feel like me.
Right, that feeling of continuity is so strong. And psychologists suggest that the reason you feel continuous is because identity is not a localized object.
What do you mean?
Well, there is no little glowing orb of you sitting in the prefrontal cortex managing the construction crew. Instead, identity is a story. It is a highly sophisticated, continuously updated narrative that your brain generates just to make sense of the world.
The brain as the ultimate storyteller, it's basically stitching together the past, the present, and the future into a cohesive narrative so we don't just completely lose our minds when we open our eyes. Like every morning you emerge from unconsciousness. And for a fraction of a second, you might not know where you are. But then almost instantaneously, your brain goes to work. It pulls up your past experiences, it merges them with your current surroundings, and it basically downloads the story of you so you can get out of bed and function.
It picks up the script right where it left off yesterday. But, and this is crucial, because we are the authors of this story, we can totally write ourselves into a corner. We fall victim to the danger of repetition.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the negative stories you might tell yourself. Things like, I am not intelligent, or I always sabotage my relationships, or I am incapable of change. Because the brain is this meaning-making storyteller, it listens to those repeated lines and begins to physically reinforce them.
Which is terrifying.
Okay.
This is where that whole concept of neurons that fire together, wire together, stops being like an inspiring motivational poster and becomes a massive reality check.
Oh, for sure.
Because if I constantly tell myself I'm a failure, I am literally laying down thick neural asphalt on that specific highway. I'm telling the construction crew to build a massive 10-lane expressway dedicated purely to self-loathing.
What's fascinating here is how these internal narratives literally become what the source material calls invisible prisons. And this is entirely driven by metabolic efficiency.
Right, the brain trying to save energy.
Exactly. The brain is an absolute energy hog, and it accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes nearly 20% of your body's energy. So it is constantly trying to save calories.
So it loves efficiency. It just wants to take the path of least resistance to conserve energy.
Exactly that. Building new positive neural pathways, like writing a new story about how capable or worthy you are, that requires actual caloric expenditure. It requires conscious, sustained effort to fire new neurons, trigger protein synthesis, and lay down new myelin. But that negative superhighway you mentioned.
The failure pathway.
Right, the I am a failure pathway. That route is deeply insulated. It is incredibly fast. It costs the brain almost zero energy to send a thought down that road.
Wow, that is a massive realization. It really shifts the blame, you know? We often think our negative self-image is some deep, fundamental truth about our character, or like some moral failing we just can't shake. But in reality, it's just biology being lazy.
It really is.
It is literally metabolically easier for your brain to hate itself than to expend the calories required to build a new positive self-image. The invisible prison is just your brain trying to save glucose.
And it feels like absolute reality to you, not because it is objectively true, but simply because your brain has become physically familiar with repeating it. You basically mistake the ease of the thought for the truth of the thought.
Okay, that is incredibly illuminating, but I really have to push back here.
Sure, go for it.
So what does this all actually mean in practice? If identity is just a biologically lazy story we tell ourselves, and the physical matter of my brain from 10 years ago is completely gone, how does society function?
That's the big question.
Let's take the most extreme example, right? Accountability. If I commit a heinous crime 10 years ago, why am I the one sitting in a jail cell today? The biological entity that committed the crime literally doesn't exist anymore. Society doesn't put a narrative or a process in prison. They put a physical person in prison. So how does this science reconcile with our absolute need for a continuous, accountable self?
That is the ultimate stress test for this theory. The source material counters this by distinguishing between an object and a pattern. The self isn't an illusion, it is a persistent pattern. To address the justice system question, think of the modern equivalent of the ship of Theseus. Imagine a smartphone.
Right. The ancient Greek paradox, but updated for today.
Exactly. If you buy a smartphone, over the course of 5 years, you might drop it and replace the cracked screen.
Definitely have done that.
Right. Then the battery degrades, so you replace that. Eventually, you replace the motherboard, the camera lens, the outer casing. At a hardware level, not a single physical atom of the original phone remains in your hand. Is it the same phone?
I mean, most people would say yes. Because the data, like the photos, the contacts, the text messages, it all transferred over seamlessly. The software updated, but the continuous pattern of information remained unbroken.
Spot on. The physical matter is completely irrelevant to the identity of the phone. The identity is the persistent pattern of information. The Greeks used the analogy of a river to explain this. You call the Mississippi River by the same name today as you did a year ago, even though every single water molecule is different and the banks have eroded and shifted.
Because the shape remains.
Exactly. You call it the Mississippi because the shape of the flow remains recognizable.
Okay, I see. So I am the river, I am the data on the phone, I am the pattern of my experiences, even as the biological hardware completely swaps out over the years. So if I commit a crime a decade ago, society is holding the continuous pattern accountable, not the specific cells that happen to be hosting that pattern at the time.
Precisely. The continuity of your conscious mind, the feeling of the water flowing, and the accumulated experiences stored in your subconscious, the riverbanks guiding the flow, those create the undeniable reality of being a person. You are not a static object. You are a process.
You know, viewing the self as a process rather than a permanent object, it actually introduces a profound level of optimism. Because if we combine this river analogy with the caloric reality of neuroplasticity we talked about earlier, it means change isn't just a self-help buzzword.
No, not really.
It is a biological mandate. We are not doomed to remain whatever we were yesterday. We can literally carve new riverbanks. We can force the brain to burn the calories necessary to build new highways.
And this brings us right to the blank slate theory mentioned in the text. You are not born with a fixed, immutable identity stamped onto your soul. The person you currently consider you was heavily shaped by stories that were installed entirely from the outside.
Right, we get handed a script before we can even speak. Our families, our surrounding culture, the media we consume, the belief systems we are raised in, they hand us the narrative of who we are supposed to be, what we should value, what we should fear. And because we're just kids, we just start reading from the script.
We absorb these external narratives so early and we rehearse them so thoroughly that we mistake them for our own natural voice. But the massive takeaway for the listener today is this. If those stories were installed, they can be examined. If they were learned, they can be unlearned.
That's incredibly empowering.
It is. Biology matters, your environment matters, your economic circumstances absolutely matter. But within those parameters, because your brain is physically plastic, rewriting your story is always mathematically, biologically possible.
I love that. The realization that you are not a finished product, but an ongoing process. But, you know, it makes me wonder, we've been looking so closely inward.
Yeah, very micro.
Yeah, we've been dissecting the microscopic synapses and the personal stories we tell ourselves as individuals. What happens when we zoom out? What happens when millions or even billions of people all agree to share the exact same story?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that individual brains aren't the only storytellers. Civilizations, nations, and massive belief systems are fundamentally in the business of maintaining macro narratives.
And the sources dive into some incredible examples of shared fictions that we simply accept as hard reality, like take the concept of fiat currency.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
If you pull a $20 bill out of your wallet, what is it really? It's literally a piece of paper mixed with cotton. It has absolutely zero intrinsic value. You can't eat it, you can't build a shelter with it. It only functions because hundreds of millions of people wake up every single morning and agree to believe the exact same story about what that paper represents.
Money is perhaps the most successful story ever told by humanity. But it applies to legal structures too. Consider a massive corporation. If all of a company's factories burn down and every single employee quits on the exact same day, the corporation still exists as a legal entity. It is a fiction we have all mutually agreed to uphold to organize society.
And human rights operate the exact same way. The universe doesn't have a biological law of human rights woven into the cosmos. I mean, gravity exists whether we believe in it or not.
Right, you can't opt out of gravity.
Exactly. But human rights exist strictly because we tell a powerful shared story that they should exist. And then we organize our civilization to enforce that story.
These shared macro stories organize human behavior on a massive scale. They define what success looks like, what justice means, where we came from, and what our ultimate purpose is.
Yeah.
And the sources are very careful to highlight the dual nature of these shared realities.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. On one hand, religious and civilizational narratives have brought immense meaning, comfort, and a sense of belonging to billions of people across history. They've built hospitals, they've inspired breathtaking art, and they've created the social cohesion necessary for us to literally survive as a species.
Absolutely.
But at the exact same time, other shared stories, or even different interpretations of those exact same stories, have been used to justify terrible suffering. They've been used to enforce rigid social hierarchies, justify wars, and systematically exclude people who just don't fit the dominant narrative.
A story that beautifully unites one group can violently divide them from another. When a shared fiction is mistaken for an objective, unquestionable law of nature, it almost always leads to conflict.
Which brings up a really tough dilemma for anyone trying to navigate the modern world. If our entire civilization's reality, our money, our laws, our concepts of justice and success are built on shared stories, how do we distinguish between what is a permanent, objective truth and what is just a temporary societal narrative that we've all currently agreed to? If it's all just a story, how do we avoid falling into total cynicism and nihilism?
It's a risk, but the source material offers a very pragmatic litmus test to prevent that exact nihilism. The goal of recognizing these structures as stories isn't to instantly become a cynic, burn it all down, and abandon your cultural or personal beliefs.
Because we need them.
Right, we require stories to function. You can't operate a global society without the shared fiction of money or laws. The goal is simply to recognize them as stories. And once you do that, you hold them up to the light of evidence and ask one crucial defining question. Does this story help humanity flourish, or does it hold us back?
Does it help us flourish, or does it hold us back? That cuts right through all the noise. Instead of arguing endlessly over what is true with a capital T, we just ask what the story actually does to people in practice. Does the story of our economic system build a better world? Or does it create invisible prisons for millions? Does a specific cultural narrative about success promote well-being, or does it just drive people into anxiety and exhaustion?
And that exact same pragmatic litmus test applies perfectly to the micro level, too. It scales all the way back down to the neurons firing in your own head. The voice that tells you, I'm not good enough, is that a permanent truth of the universe? Or is it just a well-insulated, calorically cheap story you've been repeating for so long that it feels like gravity? And more importantly, does telling yourself that story help you flourish, or does it hold you back?
It almost always holds you back. So synthesizing everything we've pulled from the sources today, true wisdom doesn't seem to be about finding a singular, unchanging, permanent version of yourself. True wisdom begins when you become deeply, fundamentally curious about the stories that are shaping your physical mind.
It's about examining those internal scripts honestly. You shouldn't blindly accept every thought your brain generates as a fact, because we know the brain prioritizes metabolic efficiency over truth. But you also shouldn't automatically reject everything in a panic, assuming none of it is real. It's about understanding the biological and cultural storyteller that lives inside of you. Which brings us to a quiet, profound question from the text that I really want you to carry with you today. Which parts of the person you call yourself are truly timeless, and which parts are simply stories you have learned to believe?
It's a beautiful, unsettling question to sit with. And as you mull that over, I want to leave you with one final thought to explore on your own, building on everything we've just discussed. We've established that your identity is a continuously updated story, physically written into your brain by your experiences, your culture, and your memories. We are naturally built for neuroplasticity. We are built to change and adapt. But think about how much of our memory and identity is now completely outsourced to our digital lives. Our photos, our search histories, our social media profiles, we interact daily with algorithms that are designed to do one thing: feed us an endless reflection of our past clicks. They assume the person you were yesterday is exactly the person you want to be today. If the self is fundamentally a story, and technology is increasingly writing the script of our daily experiences by locking us into past patterns, who is really holding the pen?